The war bells of Dracos Prime had not rung for 300 years. Emperor Thaxon believed they never would again. His empire stretched across 17 star systems and his fleets numbered in the tens of thousands. Every world that dared resist. The Draconian Empire had been crushed under the weight of superior firepower and ruthless tactics. The galaxy had learned to fear the crimson banners that marked imperial territory. Admiral Corvin reviewed the daily reports from his command center. Deep within the orbital fortress above, Dracos Prime trade routes flowed smoothly under imperial protection. Tribute payments arrived on schedule from conquered worlds. The Outer Rim colonies continued their resource extraction without complaint. Everything operated exactly as it should in a well-ordered empire. Built on strength and discipline, the first anomaly appeared on the sensor screens at exactly 1400 hours Galactic Standard Time. A single contact had materialized at the edge of the Draco system without triggering any of the hyperspace monitoring stations. The duty officer assumed it was a sensor malfunction and ran a full diagnostic on the detection grid. Every system checked out perfectly. The contact remained steady and real. Lieutenant Voss brought the readings to Admiral Corvin with obvious confusion written across his young face. No ship could enter the system without passing through one of the monitored jump points. The Imperial Navy controlled every approach route and maintained constant patrols along the system borders. Yet somehow an unknown vessel had appeared where no vessel should exist. Corvin studied the sensor data with growing interest rather than concern. The contact showed minimal energy output and no recognizable propulsion signature. Its size suggested a small craft, perhaps a scout or courier ship. Most likely explanation was a damaged vessel that had dropped out of hyperspace due to mechanical failure. Such incidents happened occasionally, especially with older alien technology that lacked proper Imperial engineering standards. The unknown ship began moving toward the inner system at a steady but unremarkable pace. Its course aimed directly for Dracos Prime with no deviation or course corrections. Admiral Corvin ordered a communication attempt using standard first contact protocols in 17 different languages. The vessel did not respond to any transmission. Radio silence continued even when the communications officer switched to emergency frequencies and universal distress codes. Emperor Thaxon received the report in his throne room while conducting the daily audience with planetary governors. The massive chamber fell silent as the Emperor listened to Admiral Corvin describe the mysterious arrival. Governors who had been discussing trade disputes and resource allocation suddenly found themselves witnessing what might be the first unauthorized entry into Imperial space in decades. The Emperor's response was swift and decisive. No unknown vessel would approach the Imperial capital without proper identification and clearance. The standing orders for such situations were clear and had been established during the early years of Imperial expansion. Any ship that failed to respond to communication attempts and continued toward Imperial worlds would be escorted away or destroyed if necessary. Admiral Corvin activated the first response protocol and dispatched 50 heavy cruisers to intercept the unknown contact. These ships represented enough firepower to level a small moon and carried crews trained in both diplomatic contact and hostile engagement. The cruiser formation moved out from Dracos Prime in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming silver against the starfield as they accelerated toward the intruder. The mysterious vessel maintained its approach without any change in speed or direction. Long-range scans revealed a sleek design unlike any ship in the Imperial database. The hull appeared to absorb sensor beams rather than reflect them, making detailed analysis impossible. No weapons were visible and no shield emissions could be detected. The craft seemed almost ghost-like in its ability to avoid providing clear readings. Communication attempts continued as the cruiser formation closed the distance. The Imperial ships broadcast identification demands in every known language and several machine codes used by automated systems. They offered assistance if the vessel was experiencing mechanical difficulties. They provided navigation data for approved trade routes and diplomatic channels. The unknown ship ignored every transmission as if the Imperial fleet did not exist. Captain Torres commanded the lead cruiser in the intercept formation and found himself facing a situation not covered in standard training manuals. The approaching vessel showed no hostile intent but also demonstrated complete disregard for Imperial authority. Its course would bring it into the inner system within 6 hours if current speed was maintained. Standing orders required him to prevent unauthorized ships from approaching the capital world by any means necessary. The Phantom ship continued its steady advance as the Imperial cruisers took flanking positions. 50 of the Empire's finest warships surrounded the lone intruder in a formation designed to overwhelm any potential threat through sheer numbers and firepower. Each cruiser carried enough weapons to destroy a city, and their combined firepower could crack a planet's crust if properly concentrated. Admiral Corvin watched the tactical display from his command center and felt confident that the situation was well under control. Whatever this mysterious visitor might represent, it would soon learn that the Draconian Empire did not tolerate unauthorized intrusions into Imperial space. The unknown vessel would either comply with escort orders or face the consequences of challenging Imperial authority. The first indication that something was seriously wrong came when the Phantom ship failed to respond to warning shots fired across its bow. Standard procedure called for demonstration of superior firepower followed by direct threats if the target continued to ignore commands. Captain Torres ordered his gunners to place several energy bursts in the intruder's path as an unmistakable message to change course immediately. The mysterious vessel passed through the warning shots without acknowledgement and maintained its original heading toward Draco's Prime. No evasive maneuvers, no communication attempts. No sign that the ship's crew even noticed the presence of 50 Imperial warships surrounding their tiny craft. The silence was more unnerving than any threat or demand might have been. Emperor Thaxon watched the proceedings from his throne room through a direct video link to Admiral Corvin's command center. The greatest military force in known space was being completely ignored by a single small ship of unknown origin. Such defiance had not been seen since the early days of Imperial expansion, when primitive civilizations still believed they could resist Draconian might through determination alone. The Phantom vessel continued its relentless approach toward the heart of the Empire while 50 of the galaxy's most powerful warships struggled to understand what they were facing. The morning shift change aboard the Imperial cruiser Dominator proceeded according to standard protocol until the universe stopped making sense. Commander Hayes was reviewing tactical positions when 50 ships and their 15,000 crew members simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no debris field, no energy signature indicating weapons fire. The vessels occupying space around the Phantom ship one moment were completely absent, the next. Emergency alarms screamed across every Imperial facility in the Draco's system as sensor operators struggled to understand what their instruments were telling them. Admiral Corvin stared at displays showing empty space where his intercept formation had been positioned seconds earlier. Backup sensors confirmed the impossible readings. 50 heavy cruisers had been removed from existence with surgical precision, while the mysterious intruder continued its steady approach toward Draco's Prime. The Phantom vessel broadcast its first communication on all Imperial frequencies using perfect Draconian language and formal diplomatic protocols. The voice was calm and emotionless as it delivered a message that would reshape galactic history. Surrender your empire. You have 1 hour to comply with this demand. Failure to respond appropriately will result in additional demonstrations of our capabilities. This is your only warning. Emperor Thaxon felt something he had not experienced since childhood on the harsh frontier worlds where the Empire had forged its strength. Fear crept up his spine as he realized that his mighty war machine had just encountered something beyond its ability to comprehend or counter. 50 of his finest ships had been eliminated without firing a shot in response. The enemy had demonstrated power that made Imperial technology look like primitive toys. The Imperial Council convened an emergency session within minutes of the transmission. Fleet commanders who had conquered star systems argued with civilian administrators who managed conquered populations. Everyone spoke at once while precious minutes ticked away on the ultimatum timer. Some demanded immediate retaliation while others counseled negotiation or withdrawal. The Emperor listened to the chaos and made his decision based on 3 centuries of imperial doctrine. No force in the galaxy had ever successfully challenged draconian military might. The Empire had achieved its dominant position through superior technology, overwhelming numbers, and absolute willingness to use maximum force against any threat. Previous enemies had learned to respect imperial power or had been eliminated entirely. This unknown adversary would discover that the Empire did not negotiate with terrorists or respond to ultimatums from inferior civilizations. Admiral Corvin received orders to mobilize every available ship in the system for a defensive formation around Draco's Prime. The home fleet consisted of over 10,000 vessels ranging from fast attack craft to massive dreadnoughts capable of destroying moons. This armada represented the largest concentration of military power in known space and had never faced a challenge it could not overwhelm through sheer numbers and firepower. The Phantom ship maintained its approach as Imperial forces took defensive positions. Long-range scanners still could not penetrate its unusual hull materials or detect conventional propulsion systems. The vessel appeared to move through space without generating the energy signatures associated with known drive technologies. Its smooth acceleration suggested propulsion methods that violated several fundamental laws of physics. Technical analysis teams worked frantically to understand what they were facing while the deadline approached. The unknown ship showed no obvious weapon systems but had somehow eliminated 50 warships without visible effort. Imperial scientists theorized about exotic technologies and unknown alien species while their instruments failed to provide useful data about the intruder's capabilities or origins. Captain Torres had survived the destruction of the intercept formation through a simple stroke of luck. His cruiser had been positioned slightly outside the main formation when the other ships vanished. He now found himself commanding the only vessel that had directly observed the Phantom ship's capabilities. His report to Admiral Corvin was brief and disturbing. The enemy had somehow made 50 ships stop existing without firing visible weapons or generating detectable energy. The Imperial fleet formed concentric defensive shells around Draco's Prime with the heaviest ships positioned closest to the planet. Each shell contained thousands of warships armed with enough firepower to sterilize entire worlds. The formation had never been tested in actual combat because no enemy had ever been foolish enough to challenge such overwhelming force concentration. Today would provide the ultimate test of Imperial military doctrine. Emperor Thaxon addressed his people from the throne room as the deadline approached. His speech was broadcast across all 17 Imperial worlds and proclaimed that the Empire would never bow to threats from unknown enemies. The Draconian Empire had brought order and civilization to the galaxy through strength and determination. No mysterious ship would be allowed to challenge the authority. Built through centuries of conquest and expansion, the Phantom vessel reached the outer edge of the defensive formation with exactly 3 minutes remaining on its ultimatum. Imperial gunners trained their weapons on the approaching target, while fleet commanders prepared to demonstrate why the Draconian Empire had never lost a major engagement. 10,000 ships waited for the order to fire and eliminate this presumptuous threat to Imperial authority. The deadline expired in absolute silence as the unknown ship stopped its advance just outside the range of Imperial heavy weapons. No further communication came from the mysterious vessel. Admiral Corvin waited for some sign of hostile intent or attempt at negotiation. The Phantom ship simply remained motionless in space as if considering its next move. The entire Imperial fleet held position and awaited orders from their supreme commander, Emperor Thaxon gave the command that would demonstrate the futility of challenging Imperial might. The greatest military force in galactic history would show this unknown enemy why the Empire had conquered 17 star systems and dominated known space for 3 centuries. 10,000 ships would speak with one voice and deliver a message that could be understood by any species intelligent enough to build starships. The Phantom vessel moved again after receiving the Imperial response to its ultimatum. Its course took it directly toward the heart of the defensive formation where the mightiest dreadnoughts waited with weapons charged and crews ready for battle. The unknown ship showed no concern for the overwhelming firepower concentrated against it. Whatever species built this vessel apparently believed they could challenge the combined might of the Imperial fleet. Admiral Corvin watched his tactical displays and prepared to demonstrate why such confidence was misplaced. The Draconian Empire had not achieved its dominant position through negotiation or compromise. Imperial fleets had earned their reputation through decisive victories against every enemy foolish enough to challenge Imperial authority. This mysterious phantom ship would soon learn the same lesson that previous enemies had discovered too late. Lieutenant Rivera checked her instruments one final time before addressing the crew of the human vessel Retribution. The ship's bridge was surprisingly small for a craft capable of eliminating an interstellar empire. 30 human beings operated. Technology that represented the culmination of Earth's development into something beyond conventional warfare. The Retribution was not built for battle, but for the absolute prevention of future conflicts through overwhelming technological superiority. Earth's silent war doctrine had evolved over decades of watching aggressive species expand across the galaxy. Humanity had learned that the best way to protect peaceful civilizations was to eliminate threats before they could spread beyond their home systems. The Draconian Empire had been identified as a major threat 18 months ago, when their expansion reached systems containing human allies and trading partners. The crew of the Retribution had spent those months observing Imperial military capabilities and documenting the systematic oppression of conquered worlds. Imperial forces showed no mercy to civilian populations and used brutal tactics to maintain control over their expanding territory. Earth Command had concluded that diplomatic solutions were impossible with a species that viewed negotiation as weakness and compromise as surrender. Technical Officer Pock monitored the quantum disruption generators while the Imperial fleet continued its defensive positioning around Draco's Prime. The human weapons systems operated on principles that the Draconians could not understand or counter. Matter manipulation at the subatomic level allowed precise targeting of specific objects while leaving everything else completely untouched. The 50 cruisers had been unmade rather than destroyed, their atomic structure simply convinced to adopt a different configuration. Lieutenant Rivera had volunteered for this mission knowing that it would likely end her career in conventional military service. The Silent War Protocol required complete secrecy about human capabilities. After today, the crew of the Retribution would be transferred to deep space monitoring stations, where they could never accidentally reveal the true extent of Earth's technological advancement. They were sacrificing their futures to protect humanity's strategic advantages. The Imperial ultimatum expired exactly as Earth Command had predicted. Emperor Thaxon chose confrontation over surrender just as psychological profiles suggested he would. The Draconian Empire had never faced a superior force and their leadership could not comprehend the possibility of defeat. Their entire civilization was built on the assumption that military might determine the right to rule over others. Lieutenant Rivera studied the tactical display showing 10,000 Imperial ships arrayed in defensive formation. Each vessel represented thousands of lives and decades of construction effort. The crews aboard those ships were following orders from leaders who had never learned that some conflicts could not be won through determination and superior numbers. Today would teach the galaxy that warfare had evolved beyond the simple application of firepower. The Retribution sensors analyzed the composition and capabilities of the Imperial fleet, while quantum processors calculated the most efficient way to demonstrate human resolve. The ship's artificial intelligence systems had been programmed with strict guidelines about minimizing loss of life while achieving complete strategic objectives. Every action would be precisely calibrated to produce maximum psychological impact, with minimal unnecessary destruction. Communications Officer Davis opened a channel to monitor Imperial transmissions as their fleet prepared for battle. The confidence in Draconian voices was understandable given their historical record of victory against every previous enemy. These crews had never fought an opponent capable of rewriting the fundamental laws that governed their weapons and defensive systems. Their training and experience provided no reference point for understanding what they were about to face. Emperor Thaxon's rejection of the human ultimatum triggered the next phase of the demonstration. Lieutenant Rivera selected the Imperial flagship as the primary target for several important reasons. The massive dreadnought represented the pinnacle of draconian military engineering and served as the command center for their entire defensive strategy. Its elimination would cause maximum disruption to Imperial coordination, while sending an unmistakable message about human capabilities. The Retribution's main weapon system activated without any visible effect from outside the ship, quantum field. Generators began altering the fundamental properties of space around the Imperial flagship located 12 light minutes away. The process required precise coordination between multiple systems operating beyond the normal limits of known physics. The target ship's molecular structure would be convinced to adopt a different form more suitable to human strategic objectives. Imperial Admiral Corvin watched in horror as his flagship began changing shape before his eyes. The kilometer-long dreadnought started flowing like liquid metal while maintaining its basic structural integrity. Crew members aboard the vessel reported that they felt no unusual sensations even as their ship transformed around them. The hull gradually assumed a perfect spherical configuration while all internal systems continued operating normally. The sphere began contracting as quantum fields compressed the matter into an increasingly dense configuration. Imperial scientists had no instruments capable of measuring or understanding the forces involved in this transformation. The ship's atomic structure was being manipulated in ways that violated every known principle of physics while somehow keeping the crew alive and conscious throughout the process. Lieutenant Rivera monitored the Imperial fleet's response as their flagship completed its transformation into a tiny point of ultra-dense matter. The compressed object contained the exact same number of atoms as the original dreadnought but now occupied a space smaller than a marble. The crew had been safely relocated to another dimension where they would remain unharmed until the demonstration was complete and human objectives had been achieved. The Imperial fleet opened fire in a desperate attempt to destroy the source of this incomprehensible attack. 10,000 ships unleashed everything they had in a coordinated barrage that should have been capable of cracking a planet's crust. Energy beams, projectile weapons, plasma cannons, and fusion missiles converged on the human vessel from every direction simultaneously. The Retribution's defensive systems absorbed the incoming fire without any apparent effort. Imperial weapons simply disappeared upon contact with the human ship's hull as exotic matter. Conversion systems transformed hostile energy into useful power for the ship's internal operations. The sustained bombardment actually improved the vessel's performance by providing additional energy for its quantum manipulation systems. Technical Officer Park reported that the Imperial attack had increased their power reserves by 18% while causing zero damage to any human systems. The draconian weapons were operating on principles that human technology had surpassed decades ago. Their most advanced military hardware was equivalent to throwing rocks at a starship capable of rewriting the fundamental laws of physics. The demonstration phase was proceeding exactly as Earth Command had planned. The Imperial fleet was expending their ammunition against an opponent that treated their weapons as a convenient energy source. Emperor Thaxon was learning that his mighty empire had just encountered a force that operated on technological principles beyond his civilization's ability to comprehend or counter. The lesson would be brief but absolutely decisive. Lieutenant Rivera prepared to broadcast the message that would reshape galactic politics forever. The Draconian Empire was about to discover what happened when a peaceful species was forced to defend itself against aggressive expansion. Humanity had tried to avoid this confrontation, but Imperial actions had made intervention necessary. The galaxy would learn that Earth protected those who could not protect themselves while eliminating threats to universal peace and stability. Emergency klaxons wailed throughout the Imperial command bunker as General Vexen delivered reports that made no sense according to known laws of warfare. Orbital defense platforms were disappearing from their positions around Draco's Prime without being attacked or destroyed. They simply stopped existing as if they had never been built. Hundreds of automated weapon systems that had protected the capital world for centuries were being erased from reality one by one. Emperor Thaxon paced the length of his throne room while his military advisors struggled to provide explanations for what was happening to their invincible empire. 3 centuries of conquest and expansion were being undone by a single enemy ship that treated Imperial technology like an outdated museum display. The greatest military force in galactic history was being dismantled piece by piece without the enemy even seeming to try very hard. The mysterious vessel had broadcast another message after eliminating the Imperial flagship and absorbing everything the home fleet could throw at it. The voice remained calm and professional as it offered terms that were more generous than the Empire deserved. Surrender now, and your people will be allowed to establish independent governments on their homeworlds. Continue resistance and face the complete dissolution of everything you have built over the past 300 years. Defense. Minister Cragg entered the throne room with intelligence reports that painted an increasingly desperate picture. The unknown enemy had demonstrated the ability to eliminate any Imperial asset at will regardless of distance, shielding, or defensive measures. Traditional military responses were not just ineffective but actually seemed to provide the enemy with additional power for their incomprehensible weapon systems. The Empire was fighting an opponent that existed outside the normal rules of warfare. Emperor Thaxon refused to consider surrender despite the overwhelming evidence that continued resistance was futile. The Draconian Empire had been built on the principle that superior force always prevailed over inferior opponents. Accepting defeat from a single enemy vessel would destroy the foundation of Imperial authority and invite rebellion from every conquered world. The Empire would fight to the last ship rather than submit to demands from unknown aliens. The decision to activate the planetary core weapon system was made in desperation rather than strategy. The massive device had been constructed during the early years of Imperial expansion as the ultimate deterrent against invasion. It drew power directly from Draco's Prime's molten core and could generate enough energy to shatter entire moons. No defensive system in known space could withstand a direct hit from the core weapon at full power. Chief Engineer Ross supervised the activation sequence from deep underground bunkers designed to survive planetary bombardment. The core weapon had never been tested at maximum output because of the catastrophic environmental damage it would cause to Draco's Prime. Today, the Emperor was willing to risk destroying his own capital world if it meant eliminating the threat. That was systematically dismantling his empire ship by ship. The weapon charged slowly as massive conduits channeled geothermal energy into focusing crystals, the size of office buildings. Power readings climbed steadily toward levels that strained the very materials used in the weapon's construction. Imperial engineers monitored stress indicators and prayed that their decades-old calculations were still accurate. A catastrophic failure during firing would likely crack the planet's crust and kill everyone on the surface. Lieutenant Rivera observed the energy buildup from the bridge of the Retribution with professional interest rather than concern. Human sensors had detected and analyzed the Imperial weapon system within minutes of its activation. The device operated on brute force principles that human technology had surpassed generations ago. The core weapon represented exactly the kind of thinking that had convinced Earth Command that the Draconian Empire was too dangerous to be allowed to continue existing. The planetary weapon fired with enough force to be detected by sensor equipment in neighboring star systems. A beam of concentrated energy that could have punched through a moon's core struck the human vessel directly amidships at point-blank range. Imperial observers held their breath as they waited to see if their ultimate weapon could destroy an enemy that had proved immune to everything else in their arsenal. The energy beam struck the Retribution and simply reversed, direction like light bouncing off a mirror. Quantum field generators surrounding the human ship convinced the incoming energy that it would prefer to travel in the opposite direction at exactly the same velocity and intensity. The reflected beam followed its original path back to the source. With perfect accuracy and timing, Chief Engineer Ross watched in horror as his magnificent weapon turned against itself with devastating efficiency. The reflected energy beam struck the focusing crystals and began a cascade failure that spread throughout the entire system. Every component designed to channel and direct the core weapon's output was being systematically destroyed by its own energy. The underground facility shook as massive explosions tore through the weapon complex. The core weapon system did not simply explode or collapse as Imperial engineers had feared. Instead, it began transforming into something completely different, as human quantum manipulators imposed a new structural configuration on the failing machinery. Metal components flowed and reformed into crystalline structures that sparkled with impossible colors. The transformation spread through the underground complex as every piece of military hardware was converted into harmless decorative materials. Emperor Thaxon felt his empire crumbling around him as reports flooded in from across the Draco system. Every military installation was undergoing the same mysterious transformation that had claimed the core weapon. Orbital fortresses were becoming crystal sculptures. Weapons factories were turning into art galleries. The entire Imperial war machine was being converted into something beautiful and completely useless for military purposes. The human vessel moved closer to Draco's Prime as the planetary defenses finished their transformation. Lieutenant Rivera opened communication channels to broadcast on all Imperial frequencies, including emergency networks and civilian communication systems. Her message would be heard by every person in the Empire and would reshape their understanding of humanities. Placing Galactic Affairs, Admiral Corvin listened to the human transmission from his crippled command center as his remaining ships continued to disappear from the tactical display. The enemy was not destroying the Imperial fleet, but rather convincing it to stop existing in this reality. Ships were being transferred to somewhere else where they could no longer threaten peaceful worlds or oppress conquered populations. The crews were presumably safe, but no longer available to continue fighting. The Emperor realized that he was witnessing the end of everything his civilization had built over 3 centuries of expansion and conquest. The unknown humans possessed technology that made Imperial military doctrine completely obsolete. They could eliminate threats without causing unnecessary destruction or loss of life. Their weapons were precise enough to remove only the tools of oppression while leaving civilian populations completely unharmed. Lieutenant Rivera's broadcast contained information that would haunt Imperial leadership for generations. Earth had been observing draconian expansion and documenting their systematic oppression of conquered worlds. Humanity had tried to avoid direct intervention, but Imperial actions had made conflict inevitable. The galaxy would learn that there were consequences for civilizations that chose conquest over cooperation. The transmission concluded with an offer that demonstrated human wisdom as much as human power. Any world that wished to be free could declare independence immediately and receive protection from human forces. Any world that chose to continue the Imperial system of oppression would face the same fate as Draco's Prime. The choice was simple, and the deadline was immediate. General Vexen reported that 14 of the 17 Imperial worlds had already declared independence within minutes of the human broadcast. The remaining 3 worlds were apparently attempting to maintain Imperial authority despite everything they had witnessed. Their loyalty would be tested very soon as human vessels moved to deal with continued resistance to the new galactic order. Dawn broke over the crystal spires that had once been the mightiest fortress complex in galactic history. Former Defense Minister Cragg walked through streets filled with artistic structures that sparkled in the morning sunlight like frozen rainbows. The transformation of Draco's Prime from military stronghold to gallery of impossible beauty had taken less than 6 hours to complete. Every weapon, every bunker, every tool of oppression had been converted into something that could inspire rather than intimidate. The 3 worlds that had attempted to maintain Imperial authority learned the futility of their decision before the sun set on that historic day. Human vessels appeared in their systems without warning and began the same precise process of military elimination that had ended the Empire's power on Draco's Prime. Fleets that had terrorized conquered populations for decades were convinced to exist somewhere else where they could no longer harm innocent civilians. Governor Mills of the former imperial world Terran received the reports with growing amazement rather than despair. The humans were not conquering or destroying the resistant worlds, but simply removing their ability to continue oppressing their own populations. Civilian infrastructure remained completely untouched while military installations underwent the same beautiful transformation that had occurred throughout the Empire. The invaders were liberating rather than conquering. Emperor Thaxon sat alone in his throne room surrounded by crystal formations that had once been the control systems for a galactic empire. The magnificent structures caught and reflected light in patterns that seemed to contain messages and languages he could not understand. His empire had been transformed into art that celebrated peace instead of power. The irony was not lost on the man who had spent his life building monuments to conquest and domination. The former emperor activated his personal communication system to make one final transmission to the mysterious humans who had ended his civilization in a single day. His question was simple but carried the weight of 3 centuries of imperial pride brought low by superior wisdom and technology. Who are you people that you can eliminate entire empires without hatred or unnecessary destruction, Lieutenant? Rivera received the transmission aboard the Retribution as her ship prepared to leave the Draco system. Her response would become one of the most quoted statements in galactic history and would reshape how aggressive species viewed the consequences of threatening peaceful civilizations. The words were chosen carefully to explain humanity's philosophy of conflict resolution and strategic deterrence. We are what happens when a peaceful species is forced to defend itself against unnecessary aggression. We are what you created when you threatened our friends and trading partners throughout this region of space. We are humanity, and we do not fight wars because wars create more problems than they solve. We prevent conflicts by removing the tools that make them possible. We eliminate threats to peace through precision rather than punishment. The message continued with information that would establish the new order in former imperial space. Earth had been monitoring galactic affairs for decades and had identified multiple threats to universal peace and stability. The Draconian Empire had been the largest, but not the only aggressive civilization that needed correction. Humanity would continue to protect those who could not protect themselves while teaching the galaxy that cooperation produced better results than conquest. Former Admiral Corvin studied the intelligence reports that revealed the true scope of human intervention in galactic affairs. Earth had been operating behind the scenes for generations, quietly eliminating threats before they could become major problems. Dozens of would-be conquerors had simply disappeared over the years, removed from reality with the same precision that had ended the Draconian Empire. Humanity had been the galaxy's invisible guardian for longer than anyone realized. The transformation of imperial space proceeded with remarkable speed as the former colonies established new governments based on cooperation rather than domination. Trade agreements replaced tribute demands. Diplomatic negotiations solved problems that had previously been settled through military force. The federation that emerged from the ashes of the empire became a model for peaceful coexistence between different species and cultures. Technical Officer Park completed her analysis of the imperial technology that had been transformed during the intervention. The crystalline structures contained the same number of atoms as the original military hardware, but arranged in configurations that created beauty instead of destruction. The conversion process had not destroyed anything, but rather convinced matter to adopt forms more suitable to a peaceful civilization. Even the weapons had been recycled rather than wasted. The legend of the phantom vessel spread across the galaxy. Within months of the Empire's transformation, trading ships carried stories of the mysterious human craft that could appear without warning and eliminate entire fleets without firing visible weapons. The tales grew more elaborate with each telling, but the core message remained consistent. Earth protected the innocent and removed threats to galactic peace with technology that operated beyond conventional understanding. Former Emperor Thaxon spent his remaining years studying the crystal formations that had replaced his military infrastructure. The structures seemed to contain encoded information about human philosophy and technological principles. Scholars from across the former empire came to Draco's Prime to examine the crystalline libraries that had been created from the tools of oppression. The planet became a center of learning rather than a fortress of conquest, Lieutenant Rivera submitted her final report to Earth Command as the Retribution departed for its next assignment. The Silent War Protocol had achieved its objectives with minimal loss of life and maximum strategic impact. The Draconian Empire had been eliminated as a threat, while providing a clear example of what happened to civilizations that chose aggression over cooperation. The galaxy was learning that humanity offered both protection and consequence depending on the choices that other species made. The crew of the Retribution transferred to deep space, monitoring stations as planned where they would spend the rest of their careers watching for emerging threats to galactic stability. Their sacrifice had prevented a war that could have cost millions of lives while establishing human authority as the ultimate arbiter of interstellar conflicts. Future generations would live in a galaxy where peace was protected by invisible guardians with the wisdom to know when force was necessary and the technology to apply it. With surgical precision, the Draconian Empire faded into history as a cautionary tale about the dangers of building civilizations on conquest and oppression. The Federation that replaced it became a beacon of cooperation that inspired other species to choose diplomacy over domination. The Phantom vessel became legend, but the message it delivered remained clear across the galaxy. Humanity was watching and would protect those who needed protection while teaching aggressive species that true strength came from building rather than destroying. The galaxy had learned that Earth's children had grown beyond the need for traditional warfare into something far more dangerous to those who threatened universal peace. The age of conquest was ending as humanity's silent guardians ensured that cooperation would prevail over conflict throughout known space.